The moment he realized you saw through him, everything changed. Not because you yelled, not because you begged, not because you tried to explain your worth. It changed because your eyes were open, your spirit was calm, and your energy was no longer available to be played with. That moment is dangerous to someone who survives on confusion. When a person has been controlling the narrative, the scariest thing is clarity. You didn't announce it. You didn't make a speech. You simply stopped reacting the way he expected, and that silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. The power shift happens the instant you stop believing his performance, and that moment is quiet but life-changing. It doesn't come with an announcement. It doesn't need proof or permission. It happens internally when something finally clicks and you realize you've been responding to an image, not the truth. Up until that point, he was confident because confusion was working in his favor. As long as you questioned yourself more than you questioned him, the balance stayed tilted. But the second you stop buying the story, the energy in the room changes. He feels it before you ever say a word. See, performance only works on an audience. When you stop clapping, when you stop reacting, when you stop adjusting yourself to keep the peace, the whole act starts falling apart. He was used to you explaining, forgiving, understanding, giving the benefit of the doubt. He was used to you filling in the gaps with hope. But the moment you see the pattern instead of the promise, hope turns into awareness, and awareness is powerful. That's when he realizes he can no longer move you with the same tricks. The power shift doesn't mean you became harsh. It means you became honest with yourself. You stopped interpreting mixed signals as depth. You stopped confusing inconsistency with mystery. You stopped thinking love required endurance. And when that happened, his words lost weight. His charm lost timing. His excuses started sounding repetitive instead of convincing. He noticed you weren't asking the same questions anymore. You weren't seeking reassurance. You weren't leaning forward. You were standing still, and that stillness told him you were no longer emotionally off balance. What really shook him was not anger, but your calm. Calm means clarity, and clarity means the game is over. When someone realizes you see them clearly, they either step up or step away. There's no middle ground, because manipulation survives in gray areas, and you stepped fully into the light. He could feel that you were no longer afraid to lose him, and that's when the control flipped. Fear had changed sides. That's the part people don't talk about. The real power isn't in confrontation, it's in detachment. The moment you stop trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, you take your power back. He sensed that you were no longer negotiating your worth. You weren't trying to prove your value through patience or loyalty. You had already decided you were enough, with or without his validation. And once that decision is made, everything shifts. Your silence becomes loud. Your boundaries become firm without being cruel. Your presence becomes optional, not guaranteed. He realizes that whatever hold he thought he had was built on your willingness to stay confused. The moment you stopped believing the performance, you ended the illusion. And when the illusion ends, so does the control. Silence and clarity expose what arguments never could. Because arguments keep you engaged in his world, while silence removes you from it completely. When you were arguing, explaining, asking why, trying to make him understand, you were still participating in the illusion. You were still giving energy to the version of events he wanted to defend. Twist words, redirect blame, promise change, or turn the conversation into confusion. Arguments gave him room to maneuver. Silence took that room away. The moment you became quiet, not out of fear, but out of understanding, the dynamic shifted. Silence backed by clarity is not weakness, it's decision. It's the calm that comes after you finally see the full picture and realize there's nothing left to debate. You didn't go silent to punish him. You went silent because you no longer needed answers from someone who had already shown you the truth through actions. And that kind of silence is unsettling because it doesn't ask, it observes. Clarity sharpens everything. Once you're clear, you notice how predictable the patterns were. The same apologies, the same justifications, the same moments of affection used as distractions. Clarity makes repetition obvious. And when you stop arguing, he loses the chance to reset the narrative. There's no new version of the story to sell you. There's no emotional reaction to feed off. All that's left is the reality he's been avoiding, and now he has to sit with it alone. That's why silence hits deeper than confrontation. Confrontation still gives him attention. Silence gives him space to feel the absence of control. He starts replaying conversations in his head, wondering why you're not responding the way you used to. He notices you're no longer trying to fix things. You're no longer fighting for clarity. You already have it. And that realization is heavy because it tells him you're emotionally ahead of him. Clarity also protects you. It stops you from over-explaining your boundaries. It keeps you from lowering your standards just to keep a connection alive. You're no longer reacting emotionally, you're responding intentionally. And when someone sees that they can't provoke you, can't confuse you, can't pull you back into chaos, they feel exposed, not because you said anything harsh, but because you said nothing unnecessary. Silence with clarity is you choosing peace over being right. It's you realizing that some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. He felt it in the way you pulled your energy back. He heard it in the pauses where arguments used to be. He saw it in the way you stopped seeking validation. And in that quiet space, everything he avoided became loud. That's what arguments never gave you. Silence did. Confidence is what makes manipulation collapse, because manipulation depends on doubt. It feeds on hesitation, on second guessing, on your need to be reassured. As long as you were unsure of yourself, his words had room to move. He could bend the truth, soften his behavior, and redirect blame because you were still looking to him for confirmation of what you felt. But the moment confidence stepped in, everything he relied on started breaking down. Confidence doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up in how you carry yourself, in how you stop asking permission to feel what you feel, in how you no longer need him to agree with your reality for it to be valid. That shift is terrifying to someone who has been shaping the narrative, because confidence doesn't chase clarity, it already has it. And once you have it, manipulation has nowhere to land. When you became confident, you stopped explaining your reactions. You stopped justifying your boundaries. You stopped shrinking your expectations to keep the peace. You didn't become aggressive, you became grounded. And grounded people are hard to control. He noticed that his usual tactics didn't work anymore. The guilt didn't hook you. The charm didn't distract you. The distance didn't scare you. That's when he realized the leverage was gone. Manipulation only works when someone believes they need approval to be secure. Confidence removes that need. You no longer required reassurance to feel stable. You trusted what you saw. You trusted what you felt. And that trust in yourself was louder than anything he could say. He could sense that you were no longer emotionally dependent on the outcome. And that changed the entire dynamic. Confidence also changes how you respond. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond deliberately. You listen without absorbing. You observe without internalizing. And that emotional independence is powerful. It means his moods no longer controlled your peace. His inconsistency no longer dictated your worth. You were no longer trying to earn consistency. You expected it, and expectations rooted in self-respect force people to reveal where they truly stand. That's why confidence feels threatening to someone who manipulates. It exposes the gaps between words and actions. It removes the fog. It turns confusion into clarity. When you stood firm without hostility, when you stayed calm without disengaging from yourself, he saw that you were no longer available to be played with. Not because you hardened, but because you strengthened. Confidence doesn't need to win arguments. It doesn't need to be loud. It simply exists. And when it does, manipulation loses its audience. He realized that whatever control he thought he had depended entirely on your self-doubt. The moment confidence replaced doubt, the structure collapsed. Not with drama, not with chaos, just quietly, completely, and permanently. When you start seeing patterns, excuses lose their power. Patterns tell the truth that words try to hide. For a long time, excuses sound believable when you're focused on moments instead of cycles. You listen to what he says today without connecting it to what he did yesterday. You accept explanations because you want to believe effort is coming. The moment your mind stops isolating incidents and starts lining them up, something shifts. You don't feel angry, you feel awake. And once you're awake, excuses can't hypnotize you anymore. Patterns remove emotion from the equation. They turn confusion into clarity. You stop asking why it happened this time because you've seen it happen before. Same delay, same apology, same promise, same disappointment. Different day, same outcome. And when you recognize that repetition, excuses start sounding recycled. They lose their uniqueness. They lose their emotional pull. He can no longer sell the situation as a one-time mistake because you're holding the full record in your mind. That awareness changes how you listen. You're no longer hanging on to tone or delivery. You're listening for consistency. And when consistency is missing, the explanation doesn't matter. He can say all the right things, but your body already knows the truth. Your intuition stops arguing with logic because the pattern has proven itself. That's when excuses stop working, not because he ran out of words, but because you ran out of denial. Seeing patterns also removes hope that's built on potential instead of reality. You stop loving who he could be and start responding to who he has shown himself to be. That's a painful shift, but it's a freeing one, because potential keeps you waiting. Patterns tell you what to expect, and once you know what to expect, you can make decisions without guilt. He feels that change immediately. He notices you're no longer surprised. You're no longer confused. You're no longer asking follow-up questions. You already know how the story goes, and that's unsettling because excuses depend on emotional fog. They depend on your willingness to reset the clock every time he says sorry. When you stop resetting, the clock runs out. Patterns also restore your self-trust. You stop doubting your reactions. You stop minimizing your feelings. You realize you weren't asking for too much. You were accepting too little. And that realization strengthens your boundaries without needing confrontation. You don't need to argue about the excuse because the pattern already answered the question. At that point, excuses feel empty. They don't trigger hope or fear anymore. They sound like noise instead of solutions. And the moment he realizes you're responding to behavior instead of words, he understands the advantage is gone. Because once someone sees the pattern, the truth becomes unavoidable, and excuses no longer have a place to land. Walking away with dignity hurts more than staying and fighting, because fighting still keeps you emotionally present, while dignity removes you completely. When you argue, you're still investing. You're still showing that the connection matters enough to battle over. There's energy in that. There's attachment in that. But when you choose to walk away calmly, without insults, without revenge, without begging for understanding, the impact is deeper. It leaves space, and space forces reflection. Staying and fighting gives him something familiar. He knows how to handle anger. He knows how to deflect tears. He knows how to survive confrontation. But dignity is unfamiliar territory. Dignity doesn't explain itself. It doesn't ask for closure. It doesn't announce departure. It simply exits. And that quiet exit lingers longer than any argument ever could. When you walk away with dignity, you don't damage your self-respect to make a point. You don't lower yourself to be heard. You don't chase validation. You leave knowing who you are, and that certainty follows him long after you're gone. He replays the moment not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't do. You didn't explode. You didn't plead. You didn't collapse. You stood firm and removed your presence, and that absence becomes loud. Dignity also removes the chance for him to rewrite the story. There's no dramatic scene to twist, no harsh words to justify his behavior, no chaos to blame. All that remains is the truth of the situation and his role in it. That's uncomfortable, because it leaves no escape route. Can't tell himself you were too emotional or unreasonable. Your calm denies him that excuse. Walking away with dignity also protects you. It allows you to heal without carrying shame or regret. You don't look back wondering what you should have said differently. You don't question whether you compromised yourself. You left aligned with your values. And that alignment brings peace, even when it hurts. Pain with self-respect is lighter than pain with regret. He feels the weight of that choice later, not immediately. At first, he may feel relief. Over time, the absence grows heavier. He realizes the door didn't slam, it closed quietly. And closed doors are harder to reopen when there's no drama to pull you back through. Your dignity sets a standard that's difficult to undo. Walking away like that sends a clear message without words. It says you know your worth. It says you won't beg to be treated right. It says access to you requires consistency, not promises. And that message stays with him longer than any argument ever could, because dignity doesn't fade with time, it echoes. Self-respect is the moment the game ends, because games only exist when someone is willing to keep playing. For a long time, you may not even realize you're in one. You think you're being patient. You think you're being understanding. You think you're giving love a chance to grow. But what's really happening is that your standards are being tested slowly, quietly over time. And every time you tolerate what doesn't feel right, the rules of the game change in his favor. The moment self-respect steps in, everything shifts. Self-respect doesn't argue about what's fair. It doesn't negotiate basic decency. It doesn't wait to be chosen. It decides. And that decision is final. You stop trying to earn effort. You stop hoping consistency will magically appear. You stop adjusting yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. And when that happens, the game has no fuel left. Self-respect changes your posture. You no longer lean forward emotionally, trying to keep things alive. You stand straight. You observe. You listen. You respond when necessary and remain silent when it's not. That calm firmness is powerful because it tells him you are no longer emotionally available for confusion. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just done accepting less than you deserve. This is the moment he realizes the rules no longer apply. The delays don't work. The excuses don't land. The mixed signals don't confuse you. Self-respect clears the fog. It sharpens your vision. You start responding to behavior instead of promises. And when behavior doesn't match words, you don't debate it. You move accordingly. That's when he feels the loss of control. Self-respect also removes fear from your decisions. You're no longer afraid of being alone. You're no longer afraid of starting over. You're more afraid of betraying yourself. And that fearlessness is dangerous to someone who relied on your attachment. Because once you stop fearing loss, there is nothing left to threaten you with. When self-respect arrives, you stop asking why and start saying, this isn't for me. You stop searching for closure from someone who never offered clarity. You give yourself the closure by choosing peace. And that choice doesn't need an explanation. It doesn't need approval. It stands on its own. He notices it in your energy. You're lighter. You're calmer. You're not trying to fix things anymore. You're not reacting to every move. You're no longer emotionally invested in outcomes that don't honor you. And that detachment is what ends the game, because the game was built on your emotional involvement. Self-respect is quiet, but it's firm. It doesn't announce departure. It simply withdraws access, and access was the prize all along, not your arguments, not your patience, not your loyalty, your presence, your energy, your belief. When self-respect takes that back, the game collapses. There's no dramatic ending, no final confrontation. Just clarity, just peace, just a strong inner voice that says, I see what this is and I choose myself. And once you choose yourself, there is nothing left to play for.